Hello and welcome to BOT. Nidal, Lakshit, Suman, and Manthan meet here to talk about the bits of tech as it relates to digital transformation. Tune in and enjoy.
Let's go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back and a very happy new year to everybody. This is 2025, and our endeavor to do this podcast still continues. The quest is still there. So, the four of us are here again after a lot of effort. Lakshit is wearing a new jacket, and there is a reason why. Every one of us will get to know about it. But first, what I want to talk about is the recent release on Netflix and the biggest buzz there is right now, which is Squid Games. Um, I was late to the party. I watched the first season yesterday, and then I realized why there is so much buzz and why it is as good as everybody is saying it. Saying it right. I just did too soon earlier. Watched it for 5 minutes, and I'm like, "No, not for me." Having watched it enough, I realized that the show is absolutely worth it. There are a few interesting things about the show, right? For those who are not aware about what the show is, I'll quickly explain the template of the show. The way it goes is there are players who are going to play the game, and there are people who are betting on those humans, right? Those bets are actual money, and there's only one person of 400 odd people who will win the entire bet. That's the overall context. I may not get into the details right now. Feel free to read about it or go to Netflix and see what it is like. What it is like. Why am I talking about this right now? Had I been the person who was placing bets on the player in Squid Games, which is basically if you lose a game, you die. If you win the game, you go to the next round of that game. You get qualified, right? One of the many tools that I would have used, one of the many techniques that I would have used to choose the player that I'm placing my bets on to get my money's worth would be to analyze their stats on what their bodies look like, what their past life has been like, what their experiences have been like, what are their traumas, trauma triggers, what are their happiness triggers, and infinite data points like this before placing the $1 million bet on a person, because that is the most dynamic element of this universe, right? A person. Today I'm feeling happy, I might go play the best game. Tomorrow, the same game, I could be the last player. But there are tools which could say that, hey, because my glucose level is lower right now, I may not do well today. And if that tool was given to me as a person who's placing the bet on the player, I might choose to place my bets otherwise. The long short of it is that today we are going to talk about sports analytics. And I'm so glad I came up with this analogy because Squid Games will now be off my head. Uh, so that is why Lakshit is also wearing a sports like jacket, in my opinion. He can tell his version of the story to you all. The dialogue is open to everybody. This is the start to it. Let's see where we get to in terms of talking about sports analytics, not just in terms of number crunching, but also some real life examples that I have researched and maybe some of us have researched would end up being the same. Please note that sports analytics is a much bigger and wider topic outside of the world of cricket in India. So we intend to cover all sports, and if the cricket analogies take higher percentage of time, you would know that because all of us are from India, that's the sport we have grown up watching. We know that sport, but most of these are transferable to other sports as well. For example, a player stats, right? So I'll give it to you all to see what you think.
Thank you, Manthan, for calling cricket out because that's the first sport that comes to my mind, having watched it with my family, with my brothers and father in the late 90s when I was barely 7 or 8 years old. But my passion for cricket and learning more about it stemmed from that. So, firstly, I would like to wish our viewers or folks who are watching this podcast a very happy new year. May you sprint like a sportsman in 2025, and may everything that you've been wishing for go and kill it, right? So, with sports analytics, the first thought that I had on my mind when we discussed that, okay, this is what we will be speaking about, is unintentionally cricket. And the reason is, I mean, as I mentioned, that I've grown up watching this sport. I mean, you can correct me if I'm right or not, but this whether a team will win, that sort of prediction started in the early 2000s, or was it late 1990s? I don't recall. But at least that particular statistic, or the number that was there, has just, stuck on my brain. I'm sure things have changed and evolved in the last 20, 30 years, from 50 overs ODI to T20 right now, while also analyzing player performance, um, with also IPL auctions. Uh, Everything has changed so much. And I think the big force in that is sports analytics. In this case, it is particularly cricket. So
It
I
all
was,
the analysis also had octopus at a point of time, so I'm just saying it was not always numbers. There were animals who were choosing which team would win. So you might want to consider that back in the 90s.
yes. And the market, if we look at the overall sports analytics market, it was estimated to be almost $5 billion in 2024. I'm sure they would have surpassed that number. And it is estimated to reach 30 or $32 billion in the next 10 years. So it's a huge market, and it's good as well because a lot of people have interest in this field and may or may not have the metal to grind ourselves to actually go and play that sport. But being in this field, and at least in terms of analytics, maybe would help me follow my passion, right? In some form or the other. And being a statistician myself, I was just wondering, how did this field evolve in the first place in the 1900s? So the father of sports analytics is Bill James, who is an American baseball writer and a statistician. And then I was like, okay, if an action A is happening, what is the probability that action B would happen? So that's how it all started. I'm currently overwhelmed and I'm happy speaking about this. So let me know what your thoughts are, guys.
I think that's a great like segue for me to like, just when I think about sports analytics, one of the first things that comes to mind is the movie that I watched back, several years back. So one of my friends recommended it to me. I'm sure most of you might have either watched it or at least heard about it. It's called Moneyball. Right, it's a Brad Pitt's movie, and it's actually one of the first movies to talk about this, like, the game changing insights that analytics can bring into sports. And I think baseball, like Suman mentioned, is like one of the first sports where analytics was actively used, primarily for scouting purposes, right? So to find who is the best player to like, when you have a fixed budget, when you don't have a lot of flexibility, you don't have like a deep pockets, how can you manage with the budget that you have? How can you get the best player out there, who can even be an underdog at the moment, right? You are not necessarily bidding on the player that the market or the industry or the audience claims to be the best player out there, but someone who is not even looked at, right? Looking at some of their stats, when you look at those metrics, it eventually does not stand out, but the analysis tells you that this player has true potential, and that's one of the reasons to pick him up. And that's what the movie is all about, like, using those scouting techniques, finding those players who have potential. And when you are doing a traditional decision making, that might sound like a very brash decision to do, but that's what it's about. And it's how the guy who does this analytics, he changes everyone's perception about, like, what's the way to get things done. And eventually he demonstrates success from that approach as well, right? Which drives adoption. More and more teams want to start like using that technique. So back in the day, and even now, I think especially in baseball, that sports analytics, the terminology was called as sabermetrics. And I don't know if you have ever heard about this, but essentially sabermetrics is like the terminology that they had. It's actually an acronym. Saber is short for Society for American Baseball Research, and basically it started with baseball as a sport, but that was like a foundational sort of example where sports analytics became a thing, right? And now we see it everywhere. Like you see it in a lot of sports, especially like we talked about cricket in India. We talked about football. In football, like all the premier leagues, there's always like players changing teams. There's different factors to look at. In cricket, we have the leagues like IPL or other leagues where a lot of data is looked at before these auctions and all of that stuff. But yeah, we'll talk about all that fun stuff. But that's just my initial thoughts, right? And the movie Moneyball, if you have not watched it, you should definitely watch it. And yeah, I'll pass it on to whoever wants to share thoughts next.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Nidal. I think the movie Moneyball is going to be like a template for this whole conversation, because that movie is so grounded in sports analytics. That's like a template for anybody and everybody watching our podcast today. Uh, I want to call out something, that why I want to understand the reason on why is sports analytics a different field, or considered a different field than typical data analysis. I mean, at the end of the day, we are doing data analysis. We are using the same frameworks. We will use the historical data. We will try and predict the outcome of a certain event based on the historical data. So why is sports analytics so different, and why is it even needed, or why should it even be labeled differently? Typically, in any type of analytics or analysis project, we have two stakeholders: the business and the consumer. The reason why sports analytics, in my opinion, is different from typical data analysis, because it has an additional stakeholder: the athletes, or the player themselves, the athletes, the player, the team. So, in sports analytics, in my opinion, there are three critical stakeholders: the business, the consumer, and the athlete themselves. For the business, it's about which teams to sponsor, where to put their money in, how much should they be sponsoring, how can they merchandise their brands, how can they influence their brands, and uh, grab as much eyeball during any of these sporting events so that they can sell more. So the idea is to sell more, reach out to higher viewership, and just to uh, get bigger and bigger through these during these sporting events. For the consumers, it's about immersive experience. How can they improve their experience of watching sports? So there's a lot of advancements in AI that has been driven due to the viewership and the success of these sports. Technologies like Hawkeye in cricket. In tennis, you have a similar technology that tells you whether the ball was in or out. It's a predictive technology. Even the DRS in cricket it's a predictive technology. At the end of the day, it's not exact science. It's predictive in nature. It's ML based technologies. Uh, I recently learned. I know that in the latest FIFA, in the latest football World Cup, they actually use trackers within the football to track how much was the ball rolling, how does it spin, how does a person, when they click it, does it swing across the air, the ground conditions, the atmospheric conditions, how are all of that affected in the movement of the ball, and to try and determine the best. Imagine, we always assume that the best shape for a football is always spherical, but they then come up with the texture, the material for the football that will have the best impact. I'll also talk about, like some of this R&D that has gone into the game has actually led to so much advancement that some of these R&D actually were banned in certain sports. So, for example, Nike actually came up with this shoe, Alpha Fly, Vaporfly, that was actually banned in Olympics because it was so efficient, and no other brand could actually compete with it. Similarly, in swimming, they actually came up with a texture, a material that made larger athletes more buoyant, more easier to swim, and actually gave them a competitive edge without even the extra effort. So there's a term for it starting to coin called it tech doping. We'll come to that later. But the idea here is that with sports analytics, uh, the buck doesn't stop at the consumer. It helps, while it helps the consumer for better immersive experience, it does help our athletes for better performance, and as Nidal already mentioned, for scouting and recruiting purposes, so the game gets better and better. The better the games become, the bigger they become, the more viewership, more consumers, more the consumers, the bigger the business it becomes.
Interesting, Lakshit. I think one of the important points you mentioned is that it is still data analytics. That's why is sports analytics different, right? I think that is a very fair point to bring up because, like how you need specific knowledge for health to perform health analytics or to do anything in the wider umbrella we call health analytics, the same way it is sports, right? The metrics that are available in sports are not the metrics that are widely used, right? For example, the sneakometer in cricket that was introduced early 2000s, right, which was the biggest tech out there back in the day, which could tell if the ball had hit the bat before reaching wherever it was supposed to reach, right? That is the technology was game changing because other than that, it was just human and umpire dependent. Um, so yes, the parameters are very much different. But as I speak about parameters, I also want to highlight that when we say the word analytics, which is so overused right now, that you could basically say any word, put analytics after it, and it would sound logical or it would sound fancy. But if we try to understand the amount of variables that are involved in sports analysis, right? What we by default might end up thinking is that hey, you what you do is you take historical data. You would, for example, take how many goals did this person score in the last 10 years and what were their health parameters, and basis that here is the probability of how many goals this person would score in the next game, right? This is essentially the first thought that most people would get when it comes to sports analytics, but it is much beyond that. And what the example that I just gave is very preliminary, and in a way a lot archaic as well, because it has been done and it is at a very obvious state right now. And in my understanding, and based on my research, it's not a claim, it's just a research, that this analysis has mostly failed. There is a reason why. There are factors which are static in nature, meaning that it would stay as is. For example, the number of goals a player has scored up until now, or on a given round, or whatever parameters you put in that. But then there are parameters which are dynamic. For example, if a health monitor, a health watch was put on the player's body while they were playing, those stats would continue to change. There are factors which we may not take into consideration, like humidity, which would change a player's heart rate to a certain level, and the kind of shoe that player was wearing that day, basis which these historical parameters will have an impact, right? So, as much as the predictive aspect of sports analytics is interesting and is trying to make its way through, what is where the bigger challenge lies is in the dynamic variables or the dynamic parameters that I'm trying to highlight here. That is one of the takeaways that I have based on the research, and that as a concept will change a lot. That's why there are, right from the first Fitbit to whatever the first fitness tracker might be, which was just probably tracking heart rate, to everything else, to having an iWatch today or the Samsung Watch or the Garmin fitness trackers that are available, and there are so many that I'm not even naming right now, which does a better job at all of this. That people are trying to take this into consideration, right? I could say that yes, this person is a good player based on how many runs they have scored or how many goals they have scored, but that doesn't make them a good player today. If somebody is feeling sick today, if their glucose is spiked or too much down, then they are not going to perform today. That is a parameter clubbed with the parameters that we already have will probably make a difference in the sports analytics field. So that's also one dark side I wanted to highlight, that we still not fully there in terms of getting that analysis done.
Absolutely, Manthan. Like external factors, how can we predict, right? Or how can we analyze? That absolutely makes sense. When I think about this field, I also think, okay, it takes me back to my childhood, right? How good were I in sports, or what were the sports that interested me as a child? And from there, if I compare today, there are a lot of companies, especially sports tech-based companies that are coming up, right? And if you all remember, there was a company called as Push Sports on Shark Tank India. I don't know which season was it, but they are selling parameters. I mean, or more, or the key aspect of their company was actually building sports academies, inculcating sports more into in the school, because I mean, I'm talking about Bombay. We may or may not have big grounds. All right, it may sound obnoxious to a lot of people living everywhere else, but that's the reality. So how children, especially in these times, would be interested in playing any sport for that matter, right? Um, there should be an infrastructure supporting uh, uh, children to go out and play, right? Um, in that reference, there are many companies who are into this space, into this particular sports tech space. How I see it is in two ways. One is uh, an individual or a child. Can you hire a coach that would cost you X amount every month or annually, and who would help you grow in the sports that you're trying to play? Let's consider cricket as an example here. Versus, there are apps currently available that you can get downloaded from the App Store, and it will gauge your certain movement as to how you're bowling or how whatever the parameters are, and can help you and will guide you. This is where we are at when I think of generally people like us who are not actively into any sports or playing anything at a national, state, or whatever level. So how can we grow? It's a trade-off that I see. Um, but with the technology evolving, especially in this space, it's interesting that even children or common people like us, if we are interested, we can just download those apps and go ahead and work our way onwards. It may or may not be helpful, it may or may not be accurate, but at least we're getting started. So I see that as a positive side instead of negative. And then if you have money later, when you have reached a certain level, you can definitely hire a coach, right? So if this especially companies who are into sports tech, if they tie up with schools, it would be very much beneficial both the ways. So that are my thoughts. These are my thoughts.
Thanks, Suman. So while you were speaking, about both just taking point from both you and Manthan, I realized something very interesting. Manthan used a word interchangeable, and that's triggered something in my head. So typically, analytics, data analytics, and other fields like non-sporting fields can have interchangeable or transferable skills as an analyst. So if I'm a data analyst, I'm a market analyst. I can be working on a retail customer today. I can then work on an auto customer tomorrow. I can change industry. I can work on a B2B client tomorrow. While some parameters specific to verticals will change, the broad matrix will continue to remain more or less the same: customer acquisition cost, engagement rate, how much conversion analytics, how do we CRO, conversion rate optimization, how do we grow our bottom line, how do we grow our top line, how do we reduce our bottom line, all about consumer traffic matrix, conversion matrix, more or less will continue to remain the same: ARR, MRR, DAU, and such and such. But when it comes to sports analytics, the ball game is completely different. Not only are the metrics different for each sport, uh, the parameters are widely different as well. You cannot compare somebody who's working on, let's say, as a sports analyst in football to have a interchangeably of similar skills or similar set of knowledge, at least transferable knowledge skills, for a cricket analyst, which means the scope of defining the depth of as a sports analyst is within each sport is very wide, is very huge. So it's a very in demand skill. I know that in US and Europe, very recently, because of the whole uh, proliferation of football, baseball, cricket as a sport has become so high, the demand for sports analysts has become very high as well, and these are very high paying jobs, at least in those markets as well, including India. Because They need people who can bring in these niche skills. Sports and analytics is no longer a very wide spectrum. It does require understanding of each sport very deeply in order to create or measure those metrics accurately. Broadly speaking, in my opinion, there are two aspects to sports analytics, and I'm talking more from the sports angle, parking aside the immersive experience of the customer and the business for a moment, because the business metrics again will remain more or less the same. Meaning, how do we acquire more customers, ARR? How do we sell more? How do we get more customers? The bottom line, top line conversations. For the consumers, it remains again similar engagement rates. So, what is different about sports analytics? Two wider aspects, in my opinion. One is uh, typically in a team sport, how do we get the best talent that is complementary to each other? And this is again the example coming in from Moneyball. That is, the sum of whole should be greater than the sum of individuals. It's not important to get the best individuals out there. We have plenty of such examples. The best example I can think of my head would be like a team like Real Madrid, sometime in the 2010s, when they practically got the best of players of the top of the charts, top 10 players, top of the charts in their team, and the team still just nosedived in performance across the years. But then they realized that it's not important to bring the best players, but important to bring players with the skills that are complementary to each other in order to create the best team. So, meaning performance, performance analysis, identifying the strengths and weaknesses of each player so that they can get to the right point. And second aspect of it, besides the performance aspect, is innovation. How do we continue to innovate and improve uh, the sport in itself to rectify the gaps in the game? So, of course, there is a lot of as technology advances, we are seeing that a lot of AI is shaping how the game is now being played. There is more accuracy. There's more scrutiny in each game. There are so many cameras putting in every angle, 360-degree cameras. So improving the sport in itself will increase engagement for the viewers and for the viewership, for the athletes, for the player, and for the analysts. It becomes important to identify those gaps in the sport that are causing friction in the experience of the consumers and the athletes. That is one of the key challenges or a problem that an analyst would be able to solve for. Bringing in application to solve for it is the next step, but identifying the gap is one critical aspect of the sports analyst. Secondly, identifying the best team combination or the best combination of team, individual players, team, strength and weakness, and the performance analysis is another key aspect. The culmination of these two would result in the better accuracy of the outcome of the game, whichever sport that be. That is the application, because eventually, what is happening nowadays in the last 5-10 years at least, and might be slightly controversial, people want to predict the outcomes of the game so that they can wager better on these games. It may not be uh, like explicitly legal business in India, but outside of India, a lot of companies are built entirely on these predictive models, and they're spending heavily millions and sometimes even billions of dollars into these analytics in order to identify the best outcome so that they can put their wager on it, and they can in fact provide platforms for consumers to come read those stats, get some insights, and make some betting platforms or wager platforms to make a business out of it.
Some great call outs, Lakshit. I think, especially, I was able to connect with some of the things you mentioned. Like, for instance, the use of AI is more in this domain, right? And I think Manthan mentioned earlier that you are using more wearable tech. That's another trend that's on the rise. For example, smart insoles, right? Even not just the football that was like, in the last World Cup, it had like these trackers on every element that's moving on the field has some sort of trackers on it, right? And if it's not an element where you can like embed a tracker, you're still using either augmented reality, or you're sometimes using other technology to track it without putting a tracker on that element. All of this to say, every element is measured, and it's more. It's much more easier with technology, right? So we are seeing innovative ways in which all of these different elements are tracked. One of the other applications is also injury prevention, right? And Lakshit mentioned the use of AI more and more. And what we have seen from, like, researchers studies into, like, some of the trends that are coming up, is also the use of AI for something like building the best team, right? Like Lakshit mentioned, I think the example for Real Madrid, you don't need just the best players, you need to have a great team. Do they play well together? Do someone is someone able to complement the gap that someone else has? And for that sort of thing, AI is being used a lot, to devise game strategy, to look at what the ideal team looks like, and also to prepare customized training programs for each of the athletes, right? And when it comes to the training programs, there's a lot of data being analyzed. For example, the player's physique, what are their oxygen levels, their heart rates, the stress that's accumulated in their body over time, how much recovery they need, what recovery techniques would work best for them. For example, if you look at high contact sports like maybe mixed martial arts, there's a lot of impact on their body, and do are there specific points in their body that have taken more impact as compared to others? And when you're doing the devising training programs for those athletes, should you maybe go light on some of those areas that are prone to more injuries? Because we have always seen that players get injured not only during the actual games, but they also get injured during trainings. So is there a training program that can address that sort of thing? So that's definitely, the use of AI is on the rise, and that applies for pretty much everything that we have talked about in our last few episodes as well. One last thing I'd share is also that we've talked about the player being the third stakeholder in this, like again equating to how Lakshit mentioned sports analytics is different. There's also another segment that's we've talked about the user base or the end consumer, but there's also, let's say, fans. Analytics is used a lot off the field as well. So we've talked a lot about on the field, how games are evaluated, how player performance is evaluated, but there's the business side of it as well, where a team needs to sell tickets, and need to sell merchandise, and promote players. They have their social media, so that's another thing altogether. But off the field as well, there's analytics involved, to look at to boost sales of tickets, merchandise, and also to boost, let's say, fan engagements. So that's just another aspect of it as well, where maybe you sometimes don't need those sort of niche skills, because it's a lot of marketing plus effectiveness of sales improvements and things like that can still apply. But yes, for sure, within a game, when you are like within a specific sport, you might need people who are like who are passionate about that game. They know that game really well. It's not just the skill sets, but also how much you know the game, how much you have followed the game through the years. And but at the same time, not let all of that, let's say, bias come into your making your analytics decisions, because sometimes that's what Moneyball did as well, against your traditional decision making sort of approaches. You're now letting data drive that. And yeah, that's an interesting trend to observe for sure.
Yeah, good one, Nada. As far as the fan analytics is concerned, or the business side of sports is concerned, I think it is debatable whether we call it sports analytics, right? It needs a lot of analysis. It is directly connected to which player is going to play on a given day. That the number of footfall, the number of people in a ground would differ, right? Obviously, it is connected. But then, if I speak about one specific uh, gap, so to speak, is that there is no real time data available for sports. Meaning, if I am on the ground and I have scored 2 goals, what is the probability that I'll score the third goal is something that happens on the ground only, is something that maybe the player around me can tell, or my coach who's watching the entire game from the boundary can tell, based on some parameters that they would analyze, right? Meaning what kind of form I am in, whether I'm tired or not, whether I've already played the 80-minute duration, and whether it is the last 10 minute stamina that I still have, whether my positioning is right, whether I'm running at the same rate, so on and so forth, right? Just an example of how real-time data would actually help the sports itself, as opposed to just analyzing what has already happened or analyzing some stats. Why real-time is good is because that would help somebody take a decision to change the player and say that, hey, this player can go off the field now, right? Right now it is being done already, but basis judgment, not basis. It is not a data backed decision. It can be a data assisted decision, at least. That is my point number one. Point number two is that there are scenarios, and of course there is exception in everything that we do, where all of this could be entirely wrong. I'll quote the game of cricket again, but this could be true for almost all sports in the world, where a player was injured, they had a band-aid on their face, right? A big band-aid, and they still happen to be the highest wicket taker in the game of cricket on that day, right? So if you then try to apply analytics on this one, it would completely fail, meaning the all the real-time reports or stats and all the historical data would suggest that, hey, please take this player off the ground. But guess what? That player is performing the best. That's where the gap of having the human element input should be there. Meaning there should be a stat that the coach puts in, right? Which then combines to make a decision. Something like that, such that the decision is data assisted and not just data backed. That is also one of the things I find interesting.
I just like to I just like to add one thing to what Manthan said about some of these real time predictions going so opposite sometimes. I remember this cricket match between India and Pakistan semi-final T20, where India's chances of winning the match was less than 1% at one time, and we still ended up winning that game. And it's that same game where Virat Kohli hit that shot of the century, six. So yeah, kudos to him. But
Yeah.
just wanted to add to that point. Please
Yes,
continue,
the
Suman.
Yeah.
odds do change. So all the people who might have bet on India, they would have won a lot of money. Most certainly. So, as we are speaking about, let's say, a player getting injured and still playing, or the real-time analytics would change absolutely when a player is actually playing. With this introduction of Gen AI recently, we can do simulation of all the scenarios, possible scenarios, right? In a game and see how do we want to plan the next move or whatever that is. There's also injury prediction that is done. So all of these things, considering video and motion analysis as well, I think we are paving the way ahead, and it will reach at a point we don't know. I mean, I can't really think about it. Even when I'm trying to think, I think I just can't think anything here, right? And the other fourth important thing is betting, correct? All of us have mentioned betting here and there, but especially for our viewers and listeners, I would like to say that betting in India specifically is not legal. But even while we are watching any match, a cricket match, you would see ads, betting ads, right? Um, so Petting in particular, I would like to emphasize on that a little bit, that it has a positive and negative implication on us as viewers when we're watching any sports, which is fans, on the players themselves. Because maybe if a lot of people like a particular player, sportsman, there is a probability that he would be selected versus somebody who is, I don't know, who can be compared or not. And in the whole sports ecosystem, so I would just like to say that please know the risk and concerns. The reason is that I was looking up and I see that because of this betting habit, people get addicted to it and families are destroyed. Like people, even youngsters, they are betting because they're very passionate about it, but then there are a lot of debts on them. They may or may not be hiding from their parents, and things go down the south, right? Which we don't want. So a regulation is required, definitely. But apart from that, individually, I think we should be cognizant of this particular fact and seek help if it's needed, um, as much as we're passionate about sports.
Plus one to Suman's point, if you're struggling with gambling addiction or any of these betting, please seek help. Please seek counseling. It is very critical. It doesn't affect just yourself but your family. But moving away from that and more to a happier side, I now like to share a use case that actually we worked on, wherein we used a lot of sports analytics and match moments to help fans and businesses engage more during sporting events. Now, what's a sporting event? A sporting event simply is like a live telecast of, let's say, a big cricket match or a football. Now, all of these now, typically, and it's very important to consider, there are if 100 people are watching a sporting event, not all 100 people will actually watch the game from start to end. It does not happen. People watch moments in a match. There are, even if you see the bar graph, I think today OTT platforms now have a viewership graph where they show how much was the engagement from the start of the game, middle of the game, towards the end of the game, and you will realize that the engagement is highest towards the start of the game, tapers down towards the middle, and typically has then more in the end of the game. This, in fact, was one of the reasons, very critical reasons, why T20 exists today. Because cricketers or the cricket management realized that apart from test matches, when people were watching one day cricket, there was highest engagement in the first 10, 15 overs, and the highest engagement in the last 10 overs or so. The middle 25 overs were just not getting any love. People were just battling it out, idling it away, which actually resulted in the culmination and bringing up a sport like T20. So imagine an entire new line of business, or in sport, a new format of sport being created based on decisions and analytics engagement. This is one use case of how sports analytics is shaping cricket today, shaping the game today. Now coming to a business side of things, as Nidal also mentioned, that how do we improve the customer experience, the fans off the field, off the field experiences. So while people are not always watching the game, they're still browsing about it, they're still reading about it, they're still trying to go to community centers, like community chats, group chats. They're talking about it. They are engaged in the game even during the intervals of the game or between two games as well. One of the use cases that we implemented during one of these sporting event called as IPL. IPL is one of the largest events globally. In fact, it is the second largest viewed global event after the Super Bowl event. At one point, the viewership is that high. It's a global event at this point. It's only advertised in maybe a maximum of 10 nations, and still. Uh, One of the use cases that we implemented was, how do we help our advertisers gain user attention during real time feeds of the match, like critical match moments. What are critical match moments? Fours, sixes, a wicket getting down. So while utilizing these critical match moments, we would send advert we will activate, or activate the creatives or the advertising spends of the advertiser using automated APIs, real time APIs, using Gen AI for creative, for testing. So because there are so many customers, so many engagements, we can't just have static APIs for everything. We have to test it out. So using Gen AI, we were also shuffling around a lot of creatives in order to identify which is the creative that works best, what is the time that it works best. Be sure that using real time cricket APIs, we actually deliver the right message at the right time with the right context. That hey, so for example, if it's a food advertising or like a marketplace, they will say, hey, it's a 6% off of your next purchase. Hey, it's a 4. Do you want to do a party of 4? Here's a bulk order deal for you for Wicket. Hey, Wicket is down. Don't let yourself get down. Cheer yourself up. The next play is gonna score big. Here's a big score. To enjoy the moment. So ensuring that we are sending out custom personalized advertisement, which is very critical because typical advertisement takes 1 to 2 days to publish, to test all of these creatives. It takes time. We reduce it to practically real time advertisement and real time engagement for fans, which was very personalized, which was very relevant at the moment. So using those match moments to provide relevant creatives, relevant ads, and relevant targeted offers to our customers is a part of the application that we did, and we saw the ROAS jump like 1,000% than what was expected earlier. So just one of the use case and application that I like to call out, that where an analyst can an advanced AI or an analyst can pitch in, can come in, that these are the kind of applications that they can see, they can foresee, and how they can actually help businesses using these sporting events.
Very, very cool, Lakshan. Um, I do want to conclude this, and feel free to interrupt if anybody had any parting thoughts here. Um, an interesting element of all of this is that, and probably this is debatable, right? The next thing that I'm going to say is highly debatable in every podcast that we've done so far, but sports involve physics more than any other sorts of analytics that we would do, right? We are working outside of a machine and trying to do analysis there. Outside of the 900,000 parameters there can be, you could still end up with one more parameter that was not even thought about on the day of the game. For example, my nail grew bigger, hence my glove did not fit well, hence I did not perform well, right? Just that parameter. It could be an insignificant parameter for a lot many years, and one good day it could become a very significant parameter for one player who was playing the final match and was to score the biggest run, right? So the involvement of physics is something that I want to highlight, that when things are in motion, it is bound to change, and hence the continuous evolution of data parameters need to happen. This is where the idea of sports analytics has been far from those who are actually performing the sport. For example, if I'm a footballer, I would rather work on honing my football skills or getting more time on the ground, as opposed to looking at the stats, which did not consider that I had a sore throat, right? And that's why I didn't perform well. Or which did not consider, as Rakshit was saying, the shape of the ball, right? So many parameters like that. That's where I think there is a gap between what we uh, romanticize sports analytics to be and where it is at from the outlook of a player specifically, right? So these are still tools for aiding a player and debatably aiding a player in most of the players' heads, as opposed to tools that they could actually rely on. That's the parting thought. We are waiting for a system to evolve enough such that this gap can be bridged, and that we can point out a specific system that solved many of this, if not all of it. And that's the thought of the day. Thank you so much. You will have a good day.